I never imagined my life would intertwine with the world of luxury and privilege. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Concord, New Hampshire, my days were simple. I worked part-time at a small local bookshop and spent most of my evenings reading by the fireplace or walking our Labrador, Charlie. Life was quiet, predictable, and honestly, I thought I was content with it. That changed the day Eloise Hawthorne walked into the shop. She wore a deep navy coat with buttons that glinted like polished gold and held herself like someone used to being looked at. Her voice was gentle, clipped, refined. She asked for a rare poetry book, one I knew we had hidden behind the till, and smiled when I found it instantly. She chatted for a moment, complimented the way I arranged the shelves, and left her number on a receipt before walking out like a breeze in early spring. I remember staring at the numbers for a long time, unsure whether it was a prank or an honest invitation. But that evening, I texted her. We met for coffee 2 days later. She drove a black electric car that glided through the snowy streets like a ghost. The cafe she chose was a place I had passed hundreds of times, but never dared to enter. It had linen napkins and people who spoke softly, as though their words were secrets too valuable to waste. Eloise was warm, curious. Her laughter made you feel like you belonged, even if everything around you screamed that you didn't. I told her about my job, about Charlie, about growing up in a house with creaky floors and secondhand furniture. She listened like I was the most fascinating person she'd met that week. By the end of that coffee, she asked if I would come with her to a winter gala in Portsmouth. She said she didn't want to go alone, that I'd look handsome in a tuxedo. I hesitated. I had never even worn one before. I barely owned a proper suit. But her eyes were playful and kind, and something about her made me feel like the world might be wider than I thought. So I said yes. It was the beginning of a world I didn't know existed. A world with silent drivers and champagne fountains, where people judged you by the way you held your glass or the shoes you wore. I told myself I would only peek in, that I'd keep my feet planted in my own life, in Concord. But I was already slipping, and I hadn't even realized it yet. The night of the gala came sooner than I expected. Eloise had sent a car to pick me up, sleek and black with a driver who greeted me by name. I had borrowed a tuxedo from my friend James, who had worn it once to a cousin's wedding. It fit awkwardly, too tight at the shoulders and loose at the waist, but it would have to do. I kept adjusting the bow tie, which felt like a noose around my neck. When I arrived at the venue in Portsmouth, the building shimmered with golden lights. It was an old mansion-turned-event hall, with ivy curling up the sides and valets in long coats ushering guests from glossy cars. I stepped out and immediately felt the eyes. They looked past me, through me, then quickly away again. I wasn't one of them. Eloise found me before I had the chance to bolt. She looked radiant in a silver gown, her hair pinned up like something from an old film. When she smiled and linked her arm with mine, I forgot, for a moment, how out of place I felt. Inside, it was like stepping into another planet. Strings of crystal chandeliers, live orchestra music, champagne flutes balanced on trays that floated through the room. The guests laughed too loudly, moved with purpose, and spoke in a language of money and privilege I had never learned. Eloise moved effortlessly among them. She introduced me to people with surnames I had only seen on signs or company logos. A senator's daughter, the heir to a shipping empire, a woman who spoke 5 languages and owned art galleries in 3 countries. I smiled, shook hands, and tried to keep up. Every time I opened my mouth, I second-guessed the way I sounded. At one point, I slipped away to catch my breath. I stood near a marble staircase, sipping water, and listening to the murmur of conversations that didn't involve me. Then I heard a voice behind me. Heard you're Eloise's project of the month. I turned to see a man, maybe 30, dressed in a velvet jacket, holding a martini with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. I didn't answer. He laughed. Relax. It's nothing personal. She always finds someone interesting for the season. You're lucky. She's fun until she gets bored. Before I could respond, he vanished into the crowd like a shadow. I found Eloise shortly after and tried to shake off the sting of his words. She leaned in and whispered something about escaping early, and soon we were back in the car, the city lights blurring past. "You were perfect tonight," she said, resting her head on my shoulder. But I didn't feel perfect. I felt like a guest at a party where everyone else had been invited years ago. Still, I smiled and nodded, because I wanted to believe her. In the weeks that followed, I was pulled into Eloise's world like a stone dropped into still water. Every day brought something new. Brunches in old seafront inns, art shows with wine I couldn't pronounce, and quiet dinners on her balcony where she'd light candles and play vinyl records, the needle crackling softly like a whisper from another era. She made everything feel effortless. But slowly, I began to notice the things she didn't say. Like the way she paused when I told a story from my childhood, as if trying to hide her confusion. Or how she never let me pick the restaurant, always claiming she had a better idea. Once, I suggested we grab burgers at a place I liked in Dover. She smiled politely, then changed the subject. Her friends, too, were curious in a way that didn't feel kind. They'd ask me questions like I was a puzzle they couldn't quite figure out. "So, you went to school where exactly? What do your parents do? Isn't it brave moving here on your own?" I answered as best I could, but it was clear that bravery wasn't what they saw. It was novelty. One afternoon, she took me sailing. The sky was wide and blue, the boat sleek and white like a blade on the water. I helped with the ropes clumsily, my fingers burning against the salt-stiffened lines. She laughed when I tangled them, kissed me when I looked embarrassed. "You're learning," she said, and I wanted to believe it was a compliment. Later, as we drifted near a cove, she opened a bottle of wine and spoke of dreams. Her dreams: living in Europe, starting a foundation, writing a book about women who changed the world. I listened, but part of me wondered if she had ever asked about mine. That evening, as we walked back to her flat, she suddenly stopped and turned to me. "There's a charity ball next week in Manchester by the Sea. I'd like you to come." I hesitated. "I've got extra shifts at the clinic. I'm covering for Adam while he's on leave." She tilted her head. "Can't you switch? It's short notice, and people depend on me." For the first time, her smile faltered. Just a flicker, like a light dimming. "I understand," she said slowly, "but you should know showing up matters. To them. And to me." I nodded, apologized, and promised to try. But something shifted in her eyes. A slight retreat, like a curtain drawn an inch too far. That night, lying in my small rented room with its thin walls and creaky bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of it all. I was still the same person, but I had started to feel like I was always one wrong answer away from becoming uninvited. The following week, I worked longer shifts than usual, covering for both Adam and Marcy, who had come down with the flu. By the time the day of the charity ball arrived, I was too exhausted to think about formal wear and small talk. I messaged Eloise in the morning. "Hope the event goes beautifully tonight. Wish I could be there." She didn't reply. I assumed she was busy, probably getting her hair done or sorting last-minute details. I didn't think much of it until later that evening when my phone buzzed while I was finishing up some charting in the break room. It was a photo. Eloise in a shimmering midnight blue dress, standing beneath a cascade of lights, her arm wrapped around a man I didn't recognize. The caption read, "Perfect night. Even better company." My stomach twisted. I stared at the screen for a long time before turning it off and slipping it back into my coat pocket. I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. The next morning, she called. "Sorry about the photo," she said breezily, as if we were discussing the weather. "I didn't mean to upset you." "You didn't reply to my message," I said quietly. She paused. "I figured you were too busy. I didn't want to put pressure on you." I could hear the smile in her voice, but it didn't reach me like it used to. "I hope you had a good time," I said, though it came out hollow. "It was fine. Boring, actually. You didn't miss anything." A lie. We spoke for a few more minutes, each sentence more strained than the last, before she said she had to go. Something about errands. I went about my day in a fog. Patients came and went. I smiled, nodded, checked pulses, and handed out prescriptions, but I wasn't really there. That night, I scrolled through the local paper's event section. Photos from the charity ball were already up. Eloise featured in 4 of them. Her smile, radiant. Her arm, still wrapped around the same man. A tech entrepreneur from Boston, according to the caption. The next time we met, it was at her flat. She was warm, affectionate, kissed me the moment I walked through the door. But I felt something different now. Not distance, no. She was physically close, but calculation. She poured wine, asked about my day, laughed at my tired jokes. But every word felt like it had passed through a filter before it reached her. I waited for her to explain the photo, the man, anything. She never did. Eventually, I said, "You looked happy at the event." She didn't flinch. I smiled for the cameras. That's what people expect. But was it just the cameras? She looked at me, her eyes cool and unreadable. "I told you, you didn't miss anything." And just like that, the subject was closed. Except it wasn't. Not for me. Because something inside me had started to flicker, a quiet doubt, like the smallest hairline crack in glass. And I knew, once cracks began, they rarely stayed small for long. A few weeks passed. Things seemed to settle, or at least appear settled. Eloise continued to invite me over, to wrap her arms around me at night, to kiss me in the mornings as if nothing had shifted. But the silence around the charity ball lingered, like a fog neither of us wanted to acknowledge. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone lit up on the coffee table. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't even curious, not really. But when the screen flashed again, I happened to glance over. "Are we still on for Friday night? Can't wait to see you again." The name attached was Nathan. I remembered the name from the photo caption. Nathan Alden, the tech entrepreneur. I stared at the message. My pulse quickened. My first instinct was to look away, pretend I hadn't seen it. But something in me refused. I picked up her phone. The message was part of a thread, casual and flirtatious. Nothing explicit, but the intimacy was unmistakable. References to inside jokes. Mentions of wine, of private dinners. And then one line that stopped my breath cold. "I'll book the same hotel. Same room. Like before." I stood there for a long time, phone still in hand, the sound of the shower still running behind the door. I put it down before she came out, careful to leave it exactly where I'd found it. She emerged minutes later, wrapped in a towel, her skin glowing from the steam. "Did you say something?" she asked, toweling her hair. I shook my head. She smiled, walked over, and leaned in for a kiss. I let her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside her, listening to the rhythm of her breath, watching the faint glow of the street lamp cast thin shadows across the ceiling. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because I needed to be sure. And maybe deep down I didn't want the truth confirmed, not just yet. Because confirming it meant facing everything I was afraid of losing. The next morning, I woke before her, made coffee, stared out of her kitchen window at the quiet streets of Concord. Life moved on, oblivious to betrayals and late-night messages and truths hidden in hotel rooms. When she joined me, she wrapped her arms around my waist and rested her head on my back. "I've missed mornings like this," she whispered. I wanted to ask her when exactly they had stopped. But instead I said nothing. Because the moment hadn't come. Not yet. But I could feel it approaching. The days that followed were a slow unraveling. Eloise remained her usual radiant self, but everything she said felt like a rehearsed performance, each smile a little too polished, every touch a little too careful. I started paying closer attention. When she said she had a late meeting, I checked her calendar on the shared company server. There was no meeting scheduled. When she said she had drinks with a friend, I noted the hours, the places. I even drove by the wine bar one evening and saw her there, laughing in a booth near the back, not with her supposed friend, but with Nathan. They didn't touch. They didn't kiss. But the way they leaned in toward each other, the way his hand brushed her wrist, was all I needed to see. I didn't confront her that night either. Instead, I drove home and stared at the ceiling for hours. By the weekend, I had made a decision. I booked a room at the same hotel she mentioned in the messages. I checked in under a different name and requested a room on the same floor as hers. It wasn't difficult to find out when she would be there. She had mentioned a conference in passing, as if it were just another minor event. That Friday, I waited. Around 7 in the evening, I watched from the corridor as she arrived. She looked stunning in her navy coat, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. She walked straight into the room Nathan had supposedly booked. I waited 5 minutes. Then 10. Then I approached. I knocked. There was silence. Then the door opened. And there she was. Not shocked. Not guilty. Just startled. Like someone who had been caught off script. "Thomas," she said too quickly. "What are you doing here?" I looked past her and saw Nathan sitting on the sofa, a glass of wine in his hand. He stood up immediately. Eloise stepped into the hallway, gently pulling the door behind her. "Let's talk outside," she whispered. "No," I said, my voice low. "Let's talk now." She didn't move. Inside the room, Nathan looked away, as if the guilt was too heavy to meet my eyes. "I came to talk," I continued, "but I think I've seen enough." Eloise didn't try to deny it. Didn't beg. Didn't even cry. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said quietly. I almost laughed. The words felt like ash in my mouth. "You just didn't mean to get caught."
She didn't respond.
I turned and walked away. Every step down that hotel corridor echoed like a final note in a song I hadn't wanted to end. By the time I reached the lift, I knew I would never go back. The house felt different when I returned. The walls were still painted the same warm gray, the floorboards still creaked by the kitchen door, but everything felt quieter, emptier, like something essential had been scooped out of the air and never replaced. I packed Eloise's things with a kind of numb precision, folded her blouses neatly, zipped up her makeup bag, placed the photograph of US at Mount Washington face down before slipping it into a box. I didn't smash anything. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. But I shook. Not with rage, not with sorrow, something in between. The kind of tremor that came from knowing the world as you understood it had ended, and no one had prepared you for what came next. When she came home the following evening, she didn't ask why her clothes were stacked by the door. She simply stood there, holding her handbag, lips slightly parted, eyes wide. "I'll go," she said after a moment. I nodded. I didn't ask where. I didn't care. She hesitated, then added, "Nathan has nothing to do with this." The words hung in the air, sharp and absurd. "Don't insult my intelligence," I replied. She didn't argue. She picked up her suitcase and walked out. No farewell. No apology. Only the soft click of the door shutting behind her. I sat in the silence she left behind, breathing slowly, trying to remember who I was before her. Before Nathan. Before the whole charade. The next morning, I handed in my notice at the firm. I couldn't keep working there pretending everything was fine. Nathan hadn't returned to the office since that night, but it didn't matter. The building was tainted. The air poisoned. My manager tried to persuade me to stay. "You've been a cornerstone here, Thomas. You really want to throw it away over this?" I looked him in the eye. I didn't throw anything away. They did. I walked out with a box of my belongings, just like the ones I had packed for Eloise. Back home, I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the echo of our life together. The photographs, the furniture, the stupid scented candles. I picked up one of the candles and blew it out. The smoke curled in the air for a moment, and then, just like that, it was gone. Just like her. It was nearing midnight when the knock came. A soft, uncertain rhythm against the front door. At first, I thought I imagined it. I was on a sofa, half asleep, the television still on, though I hadn't been watching. But then it came again. More insistent. I stood up, heart beginning to race, dread crawling over me like a chill. When I opened the door, I didn't expect to see her. Eloise stood there in the dark, soaked from the rain, her eyes red, face pale. She clutched her coat tightly around her, trembling. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I didn't move. My hand tightened on the doorframe. "Please, Thomas," she whispered. I stepped aside. She entered slowly, cautiously, like someone returning to a place that no longer welcomed her. I watched her take in the familiar surroundings. The way she blinked back emotion when her eyes landed on the empty hooks where her keys once hung. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," she said, turning to me. "I know I don't deserve that." I didn't say anything. She stepped closer. "I just wanted to tell you it wasn't supposed to happen. Nathan and we were never meant to be anything. It started with a drunken night. Stupid. And then it spiraled." I stayed silent, arms crossed. She swallowed hard. "He told me he loved me, that you didn't understand him, that we were meant to be." My chest tightened. Hearing it aloud hurt more than I expected. "But it wasn't love," she added quickly. "It was need, and guilt, and fear." I stared at her. "You still talk to him?" She looked down. "Not since that night."
He tried.
I blocked him. "Good," I said, voice cold. "I came here to say I lost everything, and I know I deserve to. But I never stopped loving you, Thomas. Not really." The silence after her words was thick and unforgiving. I shook my head slowly. "Love doesn't survive betrayal, Eloise. It rots under it." She looked like I'd slapped her. "I'm not asking for anything," she whispered. "Just, I needed you to know." I nodded once. "Now you've said it." She lingered a second longer, then turned and walked to the door. Before she left, she paused. "I hope someday you find peace." The door clicked shut behind her. I stood there for a long time after she left, listening to the quiet again. The strange, new quiet of a man finally alone with the truth. The days that followed were numb, as if the world had stopped for a moment and I was left suspended in the void. It wasn't peace I found, but a hollow stillness, a quiet that pressed in on all sides, demanding that I face the things I'd buried deep inside. I went back to work, carrying on as if nothing had changed, though everything had. The smile I wore felt fake, a mask I could no longer hold up. It cracked in the presence of those who still didn't know, those who didn't ask, and I didn't want them to ask. At night, I stared at the ceiling, Eloise's words echoing in my mind. Her confession, her apology, as if those words could fix what had been broken. But they couldn't. Nothing could. The thought of her left me unsettled. I had closed the door on her, physically and emotionally, but her presence lingered like a shadow, following me everywhere I went. I started to notice the small things. How the house felt too empty. How the room where she used to sit now seemed to hold the weight of everything we had lost. The chair where she would curl up with a book sat silently by the window, as though it was waiting for her return. But I knew she wasn't coming back. I knew, too, that I needed to stop waiting. For her. For some sign of redemption. I had to rebuild the life she had shattered. I couldn't live in the past anymore. It was Friday evening when I found myself at the pub with a pint in hand, surrounded by the familiar hum of chatter and clinking glasses. It was a cold night outside, but inside, the warmth of the fire made everything feel oddly normal. The kind of normal I craved after so much chaos. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. Not Eloise, but someone who had once been a part of my life before all the mess.
"Becca."
She caught my eye across the room, her gaze lingering for just a second before she approached. "You look like hell," she said with a half smile, sitting down beside me without waiting for an invitation. I chuckled weakly, though it felt more like a reflex than anything genuine. "That's the truth. Still hanging on to that old wound, are you?" I didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air between us like smoke. "I don't know how to let it go," I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. Becca leaned back in her chair, taking a sip from her glass. "You don't, but you stop carrying it everywhere with you. Eventually you get tired of it. And then you just stop." Her words were simple, yet there was something in the way she said them that made me realize how true they were. I had spent so long holding on to the hurt, the betrayal, that it had become a part of me.
And it was exhausting.
"Maybe it's time to stop then," I said, more to myself than to her. "Maybe," Becca agreed. There was a pause, a stillness between us, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't the silence of regret or sorrow. It was the quiet of possibility, of moving forward. The night passed, and I stayed longer than I intended. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel burdened. I felt lighter, as though something had shifted inside me, just enough to make room for healing. And perhaps for the first time in ages, I was starting to believe that it was possible. It was the following week when I found myself standing at the edge of the lake, the same spot where Eloise and I had spent so many afternoons. The water was still, almost unnaturally so, reflecting the gray skies above. The air was thick with the scent of rain, but none had fallen yet. I stood there for a long time, my mind running through everything that had happened. The confusion, the pain, the betrayal. And yet, despite all of that, I could finally see something that I hadn't allowed myself to see before. The chance to heal. To find peace, even if it wasn't the kind I had once imagined. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out, seeing a message from Becca. "How are you holding up?" I smiled slightly, typing back with a simple reply. "I'm getting there." It wasn't an answer, not really. But it was enough for now. I stared out over the lake, my thoughts swirling, but for the first time in ages, there was no knot in my stomach. No overwhelming ache. Just a quiet acceptance. Eloise had gone. And while I couldn't forget the damage she'd caused, I didn't need to carry it anymore. It didn't have the power over me that it once did. I had learned that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, but about freeing myself from it. It wasn't something I had to give to her, but something I had to give to myself. It was the key to moving forward. The wind picked up, causing ripples to form on the surface of the water. It was as if the world itself was reminding me that change was inevitable. And sometimes, the only way to heal was to let go and allow the flow of life to carry you forward. The pain would never fully disappear, but it no longer defined me. I would never forget, but I would no longer be trapped by the past. I turned away from the water, feeling the weight of the moment. And as I walked away, I knew, deep down, that I had made peace with what had happened. And in that peace, I had found the strength to move forward. It wasn't the ending I had once imagined, but it was the one I needed. The future, for the first time in a long while, felt open.